Hello, my name is Peter Hirschberg, and I'm going to talk to you about our Enchanted Tikit Hut animatronics show that we built in our dining room. If you haven't watched the show yet, I recommend that you do that first. You'll find a link to the video in the comments below. First, I'm going to give an overview of each of the elements of the show and how they were made. I'll then go behind the scenes to show you all the electronics that drive everything, including how it's all controlled from the show control software. And lastly, I'll give you some backstory into how the project began and developed over the period of several months. Before we get started, I'd like to discuss a term I'll be using a lot throughout this video, DMX, which stands for Digital Multiplex. DMX is the system I use to control all the various show elements via software. If you've ever seen a concert, you've seen DMX in action. It's used primarily to control show lighting, fog machines, etc. Each device that DMX controls is called a DMX fixture. DMX fixtures come in all shapes and forms, again, lights, fog machines, and the like. But there are also some very interesting fixtures that were of particular use to me: relay boards, LED controllers, and servo controllers. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Our show is most definitely inspired by both Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room as well as the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and tries to pay tribute to both as well as striving to include as much original content as possible. The show revolves around the two main characters, Zeke and Captain Morgan, who both happen to be talking parrots, of course. As the show unfolds, various other character elements are introduced. Let's start out with Zeke and Captain Morgan. Zeke and Captain Morgan are the hosts of the show and are used to transition between the various sections. They start things off with a really wonderful song called the Hawaiian War Chant, of which I found a fantastic version of on YouTube, performed by the Don Rolk Chorus. This song is notable as also being featured in Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, although their rendition is a little different. So Zeke is our down-to-earth, average guy parrot. His costume was inspired by the Barker bird from the Enchanted Tiki Room attraction. Captain Morgan is a salty old pirate bird, inspired by the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction. He sports a very piratey-looking costume and sits proudly on his treasure chest. Mounting him to the treasure chest was a bit of a challenge that was accomplished by drilling holes in the top of the chest and running picture hanger wire through the holes and around his ankles. Both Zeke and Captain Morgan started out as children's toys that were released by Hasbro way back in 2006, called Squawker's Macaw. The birds have been hacked to allow them to be custom controlled via a third-party board called a Squawker Talker, which I'll show you later in the video. The Tikis come next in the show, and bring with them booming voices, lightning, thunder, and of course, a song called, surprise, the Tiki Song, which I wrote and performed. When I first started writing this song, what you hear in the final show is pretty much the first thing that popped into my head, like literally. It didn't take that much to translate that initial idea into the actual song you hear. I wanted something kind of fun and silly. I especially like the part of the song where the main tiki starts riffing on the word tiki, which is pretty much all the tikis say. For the tikis, I had really wanted something with articulated mouths that I could animate. Scouring the internet only turned up one or two hits, all of which were far too costly to even consider. The tikis you see in the show started as some cheap solar-powered light-up garden decorations that we found at the local hardware store a couple years ago. We had never even used them as I thought they were a bit too cartoonish. But when putting this show together, I thought that aspect of them was actually a perfect fit. So out they came, and the hacking began. I ripped out the original electronics and cheap LEDs and custom wired them with super bright red LEDs sold for use in pinball machines. The LEDs are controlled with a DMX RGB LED controller, 3 channels, one for each color, and 3 tikis. For the tiki part of the show, I wanted to have some tiki torches light up. I bought some cheap standard tiki torches from the local grocery store, pulled out the oil canisters, and installed lamp kits purchased from the local hardware store. The finishing touch was a pair of flame bulbs that simulate a flame. The torches are turned on and off during the show via a DMX-controlled relay board. Next up in the show are the flowers. The flowers gleefully sway back and forth and sing another song that I had written and performed. The inclusion of the flowers in the show was directly inspired by Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, which also has a singing flowers feature. The flowers were actually the most challenging part of the entire show to implement because I had to design and custom build them entirely from scratch, rather than hacking something that already existed. For the flowers themselves, we were originally going to use these cute little guys, and when I wrote the song that they sing, I had these in mind. But after deciding these were too cutesy, we ultimately went with realistic-looking plastic flowers. We used 3 blue irises, 3 purple irises, and 2 bird of paradises. I particularly liked the bird of paradises as they look a little like people singing. The entire process of buying and choosing which flowers to use is something I'll discuss later in the video. But once the flowers were chosen, I started out by creating a 3D model of how I was going to build the mechanism that animates the flowers. From this 3D model, I was able to get the dimensions of the wood pieces I would need, the length of the flower stems, and was able to determine the size of the basket needed to put the flower mechanism into. For the mechanism itself, I decided to use 8 radio-controlled airplane servos, 1 for each flower that I was going to animate, and the servos are controlled through DMX via a DMX to RC servo controller. To mount the servos, I built a servo tray base out of wood and mounted the servos to that. I mounted each of the 8 animated flowers to a servo, and that all fits nicely into the basket that we picked out. In addition to the servos mounted in the tray base, I decided I wanted to light up the flowers from below, so I installed rows of red, green, and blue LED strip lighting, which are in turn controlled again by another DMX LED controller board, similar to what I used to control the tikis. The last character in the show is a toucan we named Preston, since that's what the original toy was called. Similar to the parrots, he started out as a children's toy that I hacked. He originally made loud squawking noises and would repeat sounds he heard, all the while moving his mouth, wings, and moving around on his perch. I just wanted to give him a little movement at various points in the show, so I ended up having to cut through his fur in the back, Dremel out a large portion of the back casing, and remove the speaker. I then replaced the batteries with direct wires to a power supply, from which I can turn on and off the power via one of the relays on a DMX relay controller board. That completes our cast of characters, but I wanted to also mention the Christmas lights, and of course the disco ball, which is concealed behind the flower basket. Both are turned on and off with another DMX relay board. And there's a small DMX-controlled spotlight for the disco ball, hidden in the rafters of the hut. Speaking of the hut, we actually purchased it several years ago from a thrift store. It was the perfect platform for our show. Are you ready to head around back now? So, here's what it looks like behind the scenes. It's pretty gnarly back here, huh? I've been focused on just getting the show finalized and up and running. I have not had time to properly install and clean things up in a more permanent manner. So, let's go over what's happening back here. Obviously, there's a DMX cable that runs from my laptop to the bar, and then it's daisy-chained from one fixture to the next. Let's start with the Squawker Talker boards. There are 2 boards, one for each parrot character. These are wired directly into each of the birds through these cables, which I extended to allow the boards to be placed where I wanted them and out of sight. The input to each of the Squawker Talker boards is an audio signal that represents the dialogue that they say and sing during the show. The Squawker Talker converts that into beak and body movements automatically. They are really nice boards. So, I needed a way to trigger the parrot dialogue via DMX. The audio signal for each Squawker Talker board comes from a small stereo audio player board. Since the output of the audio board is stereo, I simply placed one character's dialogue in the left channel and the other in the right channel, and then used a stereo splitter to split the single audio track into two audio signals that go to each of the Squawker Talker boards. The audio board was really inexpensive and perfectly suited my needs. It takes a small SD card and can play up to 4 audio clips of pretty much any length. Each of the 4 clips is triggered by a switch input, and the way I trigger that switch input is via this DMX relay board. One relay for each audio clip. Relay closes and off goes the corresponding audio track. I was able to break the entire show's parrot dialogue into just 4 clips. Since we are talking about the DMX relay board, I can also use one of the extra relays to turn the toucan on and off. This is the DMX LED controller that controls the brightness of the eye and mouth LEDs for each of the 3 tiki figures. It can control 3 channels, and there are 3 tikis. Moving down the line, we have another smaller 3-channel DMX relay board. Why have another relay board when I still had 3 channels left over on my other relay board? Well, I'm using this relay board to control the 120 volt AC fixtures, the Christmas lights, the tiki torches, and the disco ball, and I was very paranoid about mixing 120 volts and other equipment on the same board. Continuing on, there is another DMX LED controller board. This board controls the red, green, and blue LED strips inside the flower basket. This board is actually 6 channels, as they no longer stocked the 3-channel version. Had I known that in the beginning, I would have simply combined the tikis into this board and only had to use a single LED controller board. And lastly, there's the DMX servo controller used for the flower animatronic. It can support up to 16 RC servos. However, I'm only using 8. 1 servo for each controlled flower. And that's pretty much everything behind the bar. But what about the lights, you ask? Without getting into too much detail, I used basically 2 of these, 3 of these, 2 of these, and 1 of these. Let's talk about the show control software next. I'm using a program called Venue Magic. At a high level, it's one of many DMX control programs out there, but what appealed to me was it advertised as being ideal for animatronics shows. So here's the program with my show loaded. As you can see, there are a lot of tracks. Some of them are audio tracks, and some of them are what is called a control track. A control track is what controls a DMX fixture, which in my case are the lights, the various relay boards, the LED controller boards, servo controllers, etc. There are tracks for the different audio clips, tracks for controlling my lighting fixtures, and tracks for controlling the characters. Let's bring up one of the control tracks for, say, the flower song. I'm going to bring up a clip from the front row of flowers. As you can see in this clip from the track, there are envelopes which represent the positions of each of the servos over time. These were recorded in real time using an Xbox joystick controller, and then mistakes were later edited out or re-recorded as necessary. I started out by animating each flower separately, but in the scenes where they are all swaying back and forth, I simply recorded each of the 3 rows of flowers in unison to keep them from smashing into each other and breaking things. Here's an example of using the Xbox joystick to control the flowers over the DMX interface. Let's take a look at one of the other tracks, this time say the main Tiki control track. This is a clip from the song that the Tikis sing, and you can see the envelopes that represent the figure lighting up to the vocals in the song. Again, this was recorded in real time using an Xbox joystick controller. So, the way this all interfaces with the characters and lights is through a USB DMX interface box, seen here. Each DMX device or fixture has a DMX in and a DMX out, and in this way they can be easily daisy-chained. That pretty much sums up how that part works. Let's move to the next section of the video. So, how did we get here? It all started with this. A coin-operated talking parrot vending machine that dispenses prize capsules with small toys in them. My wife bought it, but unfortunately it did not work. I normally fix such things, but with no schematics to refer to and no spare parts, I half-jokingly suggested that one way to get it working was to control it via a computer, playing the various sounds that it originally made, and turning on and off the motor inside the parrot. That would not only get it working, but would allow us to have it do custom things like sing the Tiki Room song. She seemed to rather like that idea, and I actually got that working. In fact, she wanted to do the entire Tiki Room show. I told her we'd need more birds to make that work, and after poking around on the internet looking for additional birds, she somehow stumbled upon a YouTube video of a very realistic and well-animated parrot, touting itself as a hacked squawker's macaw. Additional research, and we found a person making the earlier mentioned Squawker Talker boards. But of course, we'd need to find an old toy to hack, so off to eBay it was. As fate would have it, we actually found a bird with the hack already installed, and that got us rolling with our first hacked Squawker's macaw. Originally, the coin-operated bird was going to be part of the show, but as things developed, sadly he no longer seemed to fit in with things. I started planning all sorts of crazy original show ideas in my head, while my wife just wanted a recreation of the Disney Enchanted Tiki Room. In hindsight, I think these two opposing ideas is what led us to the final result, part original content and lots of references to the various Disney material. I wanted at least 2 parrot characters in the show, a tiki bird and a pirate bird. So we purchased another toy on eBay which arrived looking like this. Thank goodness it was undamaged. This one I hacked myself. The tiki bird we named Zeke, and the pirate bird we named Captain Morgan. Lots of internet searching ensued to assemble their costumes. Captain Morgan's costume was pretty straightforward design-wise, although finding all the pieces proved very tricky. Fortunately, a friendly person on Facebook pointed me in the right direction, and we made some of it from scratch. Zeke's costume is straight up based on Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room's Barker bird, with his straw hat and bow tie collar. Lastly, I wanted to talk about plastic foliage. We decided on realistic flowers for the flower song, as I mentioned earlier, and we knew we also wanted to sort of cover everything in ferns, vines, leaves, and other greenery to make it look tropical and fill in all the empty spaces. My wife did an amazing job decorating everything with just the right amount of tropical. Purchasing all the fake greenery and flowers needed for the show was rather overwhelming. It involved not 1, but 2 rather insane trips to the craft store. Pretty crazy. But I'm very happy with the flowers I chose for the animatronic. The idea to include a flower feature in our show came, of course, from Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, as did the idea to use the Bird of Paradises.
Well, folks, that wraps things up. Come back and see us soon.
Yo-ho-ho, you swabs.
Thanks so much for watching.